All right, everybody, welcome. Today's going to be a really awesome session in training for anybody who's, number one, having problems sticking to something that they have told themselves they need to stick to. So, in other words, kind of setting boundaries with yourself. Really, for anybody who's dealing with interpersonal conflicts of any kind, relationship issues, or anxiety that tends to be triggered by other people that you're in relationship to, today's going to be highly relevant for you. This is also going to be really highly relevant for anybody who feels like they're dealing with complex interpersonal family systems. So, what I mean by that is, like if your mother is not getting along with your son, or your children aren't getting along with each other, or you and your spouse keep having parenting disagreements with your kids, okay? Anything where you feel like your mental health is being impacted by a relationship or relationships inside of your life, today is going to be highly, highly, highly relevant, because what we're really going to be unpacking in its entirety is the concept of boundary setting. Now, why are we talking about boundary setting? Firstly, I wanted to talk about this because it's a subject that's become very popular in the last couple of years, the last 4 to 5 years. It's become kind of a resurgence inside of kind of the pop psychology movement. Like all these little TikTok influencers you see all have, concepts around setting boundaries, okay? And it's become a little bit trendy actually recently. There's been a series of movements that have actually taken place around the concept of breaking off contact with other people. And we want to talk a little bit about that tonight, when that's helpful, when that's not helpful. Okay, things of that nature. So, first of all, really quick, for those of you who are live with us, stick with us all the way through to the end. We will have a free gift for those of you who are with us live. And if you could just put yes in the comments, let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me, if everything's going well. We've had some software updates and things like that going on with technology recently, so I want to make sure everything's going well. Also, those of you guys who are joining with us live, feel free to go ahead and put what it is you would like guidance on inside of the comments. Engage, put in comments. When I ask you a question, go ahead and answer, because the more you put into the comments, the better I can serve those of you who are with us live. So if you let me know what you're dealing with, I can try to incorporate that into what we are teaching. Okay? So, first of all, why in the world are boundaries important for us to talk about in the first place? Well, the first reason is that the world has been shifting in terms of the overall cultural values of establishing boundaries. And I believe truly that it's going in a direction where it is actually overcorrecting on the boundary front, where people don't really understand what setting effective, healthy boundaries even means in the first place. And so there's a lot of people who believe that they're setting boundaries, when actually what they're doing is they're creating an unhealthy environment for themselves and for others. They're kind of shooting themselves in the foot without intending to. And I really want to make sure that I can be a different voice on that and give you guys different guidance, because in my experience in the past 7.5 years, working with almost 600 clients to help them either completely overcome and recover from their anxiety, or at least dramatically reduce their anxiety hugely, like 75% minimum reduction is what we promise our clients will feel satisfied that they will accomplish. In writing, we put that, like we will put our heart where our mouth is and make sure that you get that done. And that's usually the minimum result that we end up accomplishing in about a 90-day period on average. Sometimes it takes a little longer than that. But anyway, long story short, with all the 7.5 years of experience I've had, we've had about 600 clients now. And then I've done about 10,000 consultations. That's the actual number I do, over the past 7.5 years. I've done about 3 or 4 a day. And so I get to know people who are dealing with these issues. I get to know what they're doing, what they're not doing, what's working, what is not working, what's causing the issues to be more substantial. And so when you talk to that many people, when you see that many patterns, it becomes very clear what to do and what not to do. And I want to help accelerate your anxiety recovery by helping make sure that you deal with the portion of your mental health that is impacted with relationships with other people, and also the relationship you have with yourself. So that's why we're talking about boundaries as well. And here's the big thing I want to share with you. Okay, if you are feeling stuck in your own mental health, if you feel like you're stuck in a relationship, or quite honestly, if you feel like you're stuck in any area of life, I can guarantee you it's because you do not have the boundaries in place that you need. Okay, so the metaphor to explain why a boundary is really important, to kind of open your mind up to why do we even care, why is this a skill that you need, is the following. So this is how I usually teach it to my clients. Imagine that you, okay, are the water inside of this bottle. Okay. Now, if I didn't have the bottle of water here, if I didn't have the actual bottle, excuse me, forget the water, but if the water existed but the bottle did not exist, well, what would happen? Well, basically, what would end up happening is the water would spill out everywhere in all directions. As we know, a liquid takes the shape of the container that it is provided. If you remember your middle school science class, right? That's what a liquid does. If you don't have the firm container, right, then all of a sudden the liquid just goes everywhere. Well, what's interesting is that a human being's internal psychology is actually somewhat similar. There's a million stories I could use to illustrate this. I'll try to pull a couple that really make it clear. Okay, so first, I had a client many years ago, and she had a pattern of getting very hysterically anxious. So she would not only get anxious, but she'd get herself totally worked up, basically having a panic attack. And I would do sessions with her, and she would go into this pattern, and she had gone into this pattern over and over again with her therapists and her counselors, and when she would talk with her friends, she would do this exact same pattern. And I used an approach with her that some of you might not quite readily understand, but it ended up being the best thing that worked for her. So what I said is, she was on the session, she started getting hysterical, and I said, stop that immediately. That's completely inappropriate. And I used that language very specifically. I'll show you why. Now, what happened was when I spoke to her that way, she was kind of shocked, because what had happened was in every other environment that she had ever demonstrated that pattern in, it was tolerated. Okay, so what ended up happening was she'd go into therapy. She'd been in therapy for 6-7 years. And so she'd go into the therapy session, and she would start talking about her week, and then, something would be a little upsetting, and then she'd be bawling and freaking out. And this hysterical pattern, this client came and told me, was ruining her life, because she couldn't date, she couldn't hold down a job, she couldn't do the basic functional things that she needed to do. Even if she was driving a car, if she would get hysterical, she'd have to, pull over on the side of the road. So she told me the number one thing she needed to get rid of was this hysterical anxiety. And so what I knew was that a pattern will exist so long as the environment tolerates it. I would recommend you write that down. If somebody can put that in the chat, in the comments, I'd greatly appreciate it. A pattern, a psychological pattern, will exist so long as it is in an environment that will tolerate it. Okay, this is another common thing that people don't understand about addiction. Okay, my career got started working with people with alcoholism and addiction. I was basically the guy people would come to when they had gone in and out of rehab 6-7 times. They couldn't figure out how to stay free of the relapses. And so what I learned, what I realized, there were a couple different things. I'm not going to make the whole session about that today. That's a subject for a different session. But in the context of boundary setting, one of the key things that we learned was that if the family environment, especially if the family or the friend environment tolerated the addiction would persist. So most of these people who are dealing with addiction were operating in a family or friend environment where the family didn't want them to be drinking, the friends didn't want them to be using, nobody liked it, but people were tolerating it. Okay, so in other words, like their parents were enabling them to still live at home, or they were still getting financial support from friends or family, or their boss kept giving them time off and making it be okay. So the boundaries, right? Remember the water, okay? Imagine if instead of very firm sides to the bottle, okay, imagine if the bottle were just as wishy-washy as the water inside. Well, what's going to happen is the water's going to swish from left to right and over here, and it's going to go here, and it's going to go here. It's going to spread out as far as it can until there is a container. And so what I ended up coaching my clients through and helping their families do is I help them realize that if you continue to tolerate your son, your daughter, your spouse, your parent using alcohol and drugs, they will never change unless they run up against a real boundary, unless they realize like, oh, my wife is going to leave me unless I quit drinking, then they have no incentive to quit drinking. Okay. Now, by the way, some of you might be a little triggered or offended by what I'm saying here, But I will tell you this very clearly. I'm not here to be your friend first. I'm here to be your coach. I'm here to actually tell you what you need to know. I want you to actually get the mental health that you deserve to have, not just tell you what is nice to hear. If you want to like find somebody who's just going to give you information that makes you feel good all the time, go find a freaking 19-year-old TikToker who's talking about motivation and who's talking about relationships and they have no clue what they're talking about. I've spent the last 7.5 years studying and mastering, well, I don't want to say master, I still have plenty to learn, but really learning what causes people to change, what causes people to create a real, substantial, lasting change in their psychology. Okay, their anxiety levels, their patterns of thinking, their patterns of behavior, their emotional patterns. What is it that is required in order to make sure that a change truly occurs, where they break out of that cycle of, I really, really want to create the change. I'm trying, I really want to, but I can't, right? And they break out of that and finally become in the mode of, oh, this is the new life. This is the new way of doing it. And I will tell you, one of the key things that is necessary to make that happen is you've got to have boundaries. Okay, what is a boundary? Let's clarify what a boundary is. Okay, a boundary. Sorry, I was reading a comment in the chat. Ann says this pattern of enabling an addict sounds familiar. Ethan, thank you for putting that in the chat. Eric says standing up for yourself when people think you're being incompetent when you know you're doing the right thing, even if others don't see it. Yeah, that's a good example of standing in your self-worth. That can be a boundary. Okay, so how do we define a boundary? Let me help you clarify what a boundary is. A boundary is a clarification of what is tolerable. Okay, if someone could put that in the chat, please, I'd greatly appreciate it. A boundary is a clarification of what is tolerable. Another way of saying that is a boundary clearly delineates what is tolerable and what is not tolerable. Notice I'm using these words very particularly. I'm not saying... So here's what a boundary is not. A boundary is not a statement of preference. And this is what a lot of people end up doing. They think they're stating boundaries, they think they're creating boundaries, and they are not. What they're doing is they're stating preferences. And they do this with themselves, and they do it with other people. So most people live in the world of having a preference about how things go, having a preference of their own behavior, having a preference of their own internal mentality, and having preferences about other people's behavior and the way that other people treat them. But then those preferences are not often met. So then what ends up happening is people get frustrated, they feel disenchanted, they feel unsuccessful. They feel like they're not going to be able to get their expectations met. Aaron, hey, what's up, Aaron? I see you in the comments. Awesome, glad to have you. So when people establish a preference, but then the preference is not met, then all of a sudden they become disenchanted. They beat themselves up, they guilt themselves, they shame themselves, or they shame other people. They become reactive to other people. And then when you become reactive to somebody else because they're not meeting your expectations, the impulse is to isolate or to confront. So either you kind of like get your claws out and you snap at the other person because they're not meeting your expectations, or what you do is in a mode of trying to self-preserve, you put your wall up and you say, you know what, you're not meeting my expectations, you're hurting my feelings, I don't like that, I'm gonna basically tune you out, I'm gonna self-isolate, I'm not hanging out with you anymore, I'm not gonna allow myself to get hurt anymore. Those are the two default modes that people go into when they have ineffective boundary setting. Reactivity or isolation. Reactivity or isolation. Okay, can any of you guys relate to this? And by the way, let me know in the comments, which one do you tend to do? Do you tend to get more reactive or do you tend to isolate more so? Okay, I'd greatly love to hear what it is that you do more so. Okay, so that's what happens when people don't know how to effectively set boundaries. Now, how do you establish a really good boundary? How do you know how to create a real boundary? Well, the very first thing that a boundary has to be a clarification of what you will and what you will not tolerate, whether you're setting it with yourself or you're setting it with other people. It cannot just be a statement about what you prefer. It has to be a statement about what you will tolerate or what you will not tolerate. And that's a really, really important thing. Joan, I see, says, I lost a few good friends who could no longer tolerate my old behavior. They become reactive due to my drinking. Thank you, Joan, for sharing that, and I hope you won't mind me sharing this. I know we've talked about it in your public interview, but you were also becoming very reactive to the people in your life in that period of time as well, because you were very hung up on a lot of your unmet expectations, right? If that's fair for me to say, I think you would agree. So one of the key things that we've got to do is we've got to get better at boundary setting. So how do we do that? Well, here's the first thing you guys got to understand. I believe this has served me tremendously. It's served all the clients that I've helped. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what has worked for me. And in my world, this is the thing that I really, really want you to understand. You do not get the life that you want. You get the life that you tolerate. If someone could put that in the chat, I'd greatly appreciate it. You do not get the life that you want. You get the life that you tolerate. Okay, and I mean this in all areas. I mean this in your relationships. You get the quality of your relationships that you tolerate, not the quality of relationships that you want. You get the quality of career that you tolerate, not the quality of career that you might prefer or want. You get the physical health that, or level of fitness that you tolerate, not the level of fitness that you want. And you also get the level of mental health that you tolerate, not the level of mental health that you want. Now, a lot of you guys might be hearing me say that, and you might not like what I'm saying. You might not agree. You might have a tough time going that. You might think, but Ty, that's not fair, because I try. I try to lose weight. I try to improve my career. I try to improve my relationships. I try to improve my mental health. And by the way, I'm in no way saying you do not try. What I am saying, and I want you to hear me very, very clearly, because if you really understand what I'm about to tell you, you will have a new tool in your arsenal to get yourself unstuck. If you really hear what I'm about to tell you, okay? This took me a long ass time to figure out, and I myself haven't even totally fully mastered this, but I will tell you I'm leaning into this, and it is making my life a whole lot better. Okay? When you trying is when you exert effort to make something better, but it is not an absolute must for you to make that thing better. In other words, you want that thing to get better, whether it's your career, your relationships, your physical health, your mental health. I'm not saying you don't want it to get better. I'm not saying that you don't put in effort to attempt to make it better. Okay? But what you have to understand is that psychologically, there is a difference when we, quote, try. Okay? When we tell ourselves, I'm trying to do this, the meaning that creates, the experience that creates in the human nervous system, when we use that language, I'm trying to get along with my mother, I'm trying to improve my marriage, I'm trying to lose weight, whatever. What that means, what that functionally means to your brain, how your brain interprets that language when you talk to yourself that way, is I am going to put in effort. And as soon as it becomes sufficiently uncomfortable, I am no longer going to put in that effort. That's what try means. That is the functional definition of what try means. Now, when you tell yourself you're going to try, that's not what you mean when you tell yourself that. When you tell yourself, you know what, I'm really going to try to lose some weight. What you really mean, right, your intention is, I really want to lose weight. I'm going to put in effort to lose weight. I really hope I lose weight. But notice that it's different. Like when you say, I hope to lose weight versus I will do whatever the hell is necessary. I am losing these 10 pounds. I am going to lose these 10 pounds no matter what, no matter the consequence. It's going to happen. Okay. Now, losing 10 pounds may not be the appropriate thing for you. I'm just using weight loss as an example. Okay. But if it's really, really important for you to get a particular result in your life, what you've got to do is you've got to shift from the try mode where you're putting in effort and then you pull back. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like people who try to quit smoking cigarettes, what they've done is they've put in a little bit of effort. Like they will quit smoking cigarettes for a day or two, and then it gets sufficiently irritating to them. All of a sudden that little gnawing addiction inside of their brain goes, but you want nicotine, and then they give into it. They go, yeah, you know what, I tried. And you know what? They did try, and they can satisfy to themselves that they tried, but they will not have effectively established a real boundary with themselves. A real boundary is when the barrier is there, okay? When you're using language of finality. I would recommend you write that down. Language of finality, okay? When you're using language with yourself like this is a must. This is happening now. My two favorite ones, I want you to write these down. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but these are the two master phrases that I have used to change my own life dozens of times. I've used these with clients. I've prescribed these to people in terms of like what I want them to practice, and they work like a charm if you use them appropriately. The two sentences that you can use to establish a boundary with yourself are: number one, I refuse to XYZ. I refuse to XYZ. If someone could put that in the chat, please, please, please. I refuse to XYZ. What does that mean? XYZ could be the old pattern. I refuse to keep eating cake every night. I refuse to keep smoking. I refuse to put up with how my marriage currently is right now. I refuse to be treated the way my mother is treating me. Okay, whatever it is, I refuse. And I'll tell you the person you need to start with establishing boundaries with, by the way, before you want to like use what I'm teaching you to, hey, I need to go set boundaries with other people. The first thing I'm going to recommend you do is establish boundaries with yourself first, because most of you have given your power away. You think that the person who's really in charge of you and your life and your mental health, and the person who's limiting you, is your mom or your dad or your spouse or your kids or your dog, and it's not. It's you, okay? You have given your power away, and what you've got to do is you've got to take that power back. And the way you take that power back is you start by establishing clear boundaries of what you will and will not tolerate with your own behavior, your own internal psychology, your own patterns. You've got to shift the way you talk to yourself if you want to get a different result. So that's the first one, okay? I refuse to. I love, some of you guys are already putting this into action. Aaron says, I refuse to move forward where I freak out walking to my living room now. Oh, okay. Well, that would be like, that'd be an unhealthy boundary. So here would be what you'd want to do, Aaron. The boundary, the thing that you could start to use, the language pattern you could use would be, I refuse to, let's see, I refuse to hesitate, or here we go. I refuse to wait until I feel 100% comfortable in order to move forward. That would be the boundary that you need to establish. Because what is probably happening is your mind is wanting to wait for this magic moment where you feel totally comfortable and totally certain, and then you'll move forward, and that moment will never come. So what you've actually got to do is you've got to break off that habit. You've got to establish a boundary with no longer tolerating the hesitation, okay? So that would be kind of the boundary that you'd probably want to start to use, okay? That's the first language pattern you can use to establish a boundary. The second one you can use is I will not tolerate, okay? This is the one I tend to use more often. It basically means the same thing, okay? I will not tolerate XYZ. I will not tolerate smoking any longer. I will not tolerate eating dairy anymore, okay? Is one of the ones. I don't eat dairy. I will not tolerate allowing myself to use this particular language of telling myself I can't do something. Okay, so whether you're drawing a boundary with yourself on your word choice or your actions or your behavior or whatever, if you introduce those language patterns, pick one, whichever one you want, doesn't really matter, but just pick one and stick with it, because language creates belief through repetition. Okay, repetition is what creates belief. Anything you say to yourself enough times becomes something you feel certain of. Anything you feel certain of will translate to new behavior. Thoughts lead to beliefs. Beliefs lead to feelings. Feelings lead to behavior. So if you want to change your behaviors, you've got to start by inserting new thoughts. And you can't use wishy-washy thoughts. You can't go, man, I'd really like to stop smoking. Okay, think about it. If I say to myself, man, I'd really like to stop smoking. Okay, what kind of feeling does that create? Well, it creates a feeling of like, I'd like to, I hope it occurs, I hope it happens, but I don't really feel in control of that. And so if that's the feeling that runs through my body, I can only take action with the emotional fuel that I am generating in my body based off of the thoughts that I input. So if I create this lukewarm feeling of, I want to try, then maybe I'll put in a little effort, but then as soon as it gets tough, I'm going to self-sabotage. I'm going to pull back. But if I introduce a new thought, okay, a new thought like, I will not tolerate smoking any longer. I will not. And by the way, I had a nicotine addiction from age 15 all the way up till 24. And this was how I got off nicotine, is I basically told myself, no, you're flat out not smoking anymore. You're not vaping anymore. You're done. It's over. It's done. And I drew the line very firmly. I used statements of finality. That's the key thing you want to remember, because you notice the tone I'm using with myself. It's like, I'm not saying like, all right, Ty, let's give it a shot. I'm saying, no, you're fucking done. You're not using nicotine anymore. It's over. It's done. You have to shift the tonality and the volume with yourself, especially if you want to establish good boundaries with yourself. You don't always have to do it like this. This may not fit with your personality type. I'm a little kind of like extreme, and I come across like a little like direct and masculine. You don't have to do that. But the thing is, you can say it and be final and be clear and be direct without being like over the top. It's not about screaming at yourself. In fact, some of you guys do that, and that's not effective boundary setting either. If I try to quit smoking cigarettes and then I like get back on cigarettes and then I go, what the hell is wrong with me? Okay, that's not setting a boundary either. That is not clarifying what you will tolerate and what you won't. That's just beating yourself up. And that's not helping you either. That's going to make it worse, actually, because the more you beat yourself up, the lower your self-esteem gets, and the lower your self-esteem gets, the more of an impulse you're going to have towards destructive behavior. So what you actually need is you need effective boundaries that boost your self-esteem. So let me give you an example of that. I'll give you one extra bonus language pattern right off the cuff. This one works really well. What you need is a positive identity statement. Okay, so what you would do here, like when I quit nicotine, okay, here's exactly what I did. Basically, I'd been using nicotine since I was 15, and it was getting in the way of my goals. And I realized it was getting in the way of my goals. And so one day I started using these positive statements of finality. I said, nope, we are done. We are not using nicotine anymore. And that worked pretty well. But I'll tell you the kicker. This was the sentence I used that really made it like cemented. What I said to myself is, you are not a drug addict. That's what I said to myself. Or I can't remember the exact words, but it was like, this is not who I am. That's really the one that I used often. I was like, I am not going to be addicted to this. That's not who I am anymore. So when you shift your identity language, it's like shifting the boundaries. Okay, it's almost like, imagine this water bottle like exists right here, and the water exists right there. And then all of a sudden what I do is I move the bottle over here now, right? And what ends up happening when I move the bottle? The water moves with it. The water no longer exists over here, it exists over here. So when you shift your identity statements, you say, I am no longer this, I am this now. That is a way of establishing a boundary, because the ultimate boundary is you defining who you are, right? If you are all things to all people, depending on the environment, you have no boundaries, right? That would be like a people pleaser. And we're going to talk about people pleasing tonight as well. So if you shift the identity statement, you shift the boundaries, because who you are determines what you will do, right? Like if you define yourself as a party animal, for example, you will not act all conservative and buttoned up and nervous at a party, because that doesn't match up with your identity. So the fastest way to establish boundaries is to redefine your identity. That's another topic for another day, though, okay? So let's keep going. Here's what I want you to write down. Someone put this in the chat, please. Boundaries equal transformation. Boundaries equal transformation. So if I go back to that original story I started with, that woman who kept getting hysterical and anxious, what I did is I established a new boundary. And I didn't go to her and be like, hey, I'm establishing a new boundary with you, right? I just made it very clear that her old pattern was no longer going to be tolerated. And by the way, this is what I do with every single one of my clients. When part of the reason why our clients transform so powerfully is they get into a community and they get a mentor in their corner who simply will not allow them to play so small like they have been playing before. It's not tolerated. Okay, it's just not going to be possible. So that's why the people who come to us are the Band-Aid rippers, the people who are like, I got to get this shit handled. I need to get this anxiety out of my life. Because for us, it's just not an option to let the client fail. Okay, it's just not an option for us to do that. They have to do what they got to do, but we will do everything in our power to make that happen. Boundaries equal transformation. See, when I had tried to quit nicotine for 10 years, but I didn't transform. You follow me? The only time that the transformation occurred was when I established a firm boundary and I said, we are not tolerating that anymore. That's when the transformation occurred. So until you establish a boundary, the transformation doesn't exist, right? And because when you establish a boundary, you change the input and that ends up changing the output. Okay, so that's what I hope you're getting the sense of what a boundary is. That's kind of the first half of the training today. Let's now talk about the mistakes that people make with setting boundaries. And then I'm going to give you the 2 key characteristics to establish a boundary whenever, wherever you need to. Okay, and how to do it easily and in a way it's simple, it's fun, it's easy, and you'll be able to transform very quickly. Okay, so first of all, the mistakes that people make when setting boundaries. Well, the first thing that they tend to do, there's 3 main mistakes, 3 main kind of like buckets of mistakes. Okay, the first one is that when you try to establish a boundary, you are neither loving nor firm. Okay, so this is mistake number 1, is being neither loving nor firm. Someone write that in the chat, please. Neither loving nor firm. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that when they set the boundary, they quote set the boundary. What they're really doing is they're just stating they're stating a preference. Hold on, guys. Okay, sorry. Got really sick last week, and my throat has continued to stay dry and scratchy. Okay, so what they do is they want to establish a boundary, but they don't establish a boundary. All they do is they communicate a preference. Okay, so the classic example of this is with relationships. So they sit and they complain about how it currently is, and they wish that it would basically change on its own. So they basically get into this mode where they're giving their power away to another person or to something else that's outside of their control, like their work or their like the company they work for or the government, okay, something like that. So any person who sits around and complains about things that are outside of their control do not have effective boundary setting skills, because what they end up doing is they stew in unmet expectations. And so one key thing that we teach our clients is that the way to create peace of mind, there's a formula for peace of mind. And the formula for peace of mind is when your life equals your expectations. That's what creates peace of mind. So the reason why people have anxiety a lot of the time is they have internal subconscious expectations that are not getting met. And the higher the amount of expectations you have around things that are outside of your control, the more anxiety you will feel. Because it's basically like your brain is trying to chase down all of these unclosed loops. Okay, so somebody who has a belief system of, I was just talking with somebody a few hours ago. She has a lot of anxiety driving and being out in public and being at work. And a lot of her expectations, a lot of her current beliefs are things like other people should always follow traffic laws. People should never drive above the speed limit. There shouldn't be as many people out on the roads as there are. People at work should always be kind. Okay, things like that. And so, those rules is what we call those expectations, those shoulds that she has. They're not even like that, crazy, right? It's not like, they're unreasonable. It's not like she's an idiot for holding on to those rules. It's just that those rules are constantly going to get violated by life. And so if she continues to live this life where she's given her power away to the people who are driving out on the road and the people at her work, and she's created a belief system that says the only way I will feel peace of mind is if these people somehow miraculously change their behavior without me changing my behavior, that's just not going to work. Right? That person now is going to be perpetually disempowered. And a lot of you guys do this to yourself. You're just stewing on unmet expectations that other people have. Another example was a person I worked with last week. She's upset with her son. Son lives at home. Son isn't doing what she wants the son to do. But what my client failed to realize is that every relationship exists in a cybernetic loop. Okay, a cybernetic loop, like basically imagine an infinity sign. Okay, one person is on one side of the infinity sign, the other person is on the other side of the infinity sign. A relationship is just a constant exchange of energy, through communication, typically back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So my client was basically telling me, gosh, I hate that my son never picks up after himself. And I said, okay, well, when your son never picks up after himself, what ends up happening? And she said, well, I end up picking up his clothes for him. I said, gotcha. So why in the world would he start picking up his clothes when you have created an environment that tolerates him acting the way that he acts? She finally realized that her just thinking about the relationship in terms of what her son was doing that was pissing her off was ultimately disempowering, because what she was doing is giving all of her power away to her son. Her narrative that she was convincing herself of was, my son needs to change without me changing. And the reason we create these narratives, guys, is to protect our egos. We want to believe that somebody else is the problem, not us, and that they need to change, because it feels better for us to believe what I'm doing nothing wrong. They're the one that's doing everything wrong. That feels better in the short term, feels like shit in the long term, because then you end up getting pissed off and reactive, and you put up walls with other people, and you feel disempowered, and your life isn't getting any better, and then you end up alone, right? It's a really nasty cycle I see people go in all the time. So what is the alternative? The alternative is, to change output, you must change input. Okay, someone please write that down. To change output, you must change input. This is one of the immutable laws of the universe. Think about it. If you want different output, let's say financially. Okay, if you want different output financially, if you want to make more money, that's not going to happen in this economy unless you change the input, unless you apply for a different job, unless you elevate your skills, unless you contribute more at work, unless you decide to start a business rather than working at McDonald's, right? New input creates new output. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't just like do any type of input. It's got to be the right type of input. It's got to be the right strategy. It's got to be the right approach. It's got to be effective input in order to get the right output. But it is foolish to spend your life sitting around complaining that you're not getting the outputs that you want, rather than taking your power back and deciding to take full control and responsibility for your life and saying, you know what, I am going to be the source that changes the inputs. And if I change the inputs long enough, the outputs will change too. If I want other people to treat me differently, I got to treat them differently. If I want other people to stop diminishing my sense of self-worth, I can't keep enabling them to do that. I have to create an environment where that's not going to be tolerated. Okay? That's what you got to do. You got to change the input. And by the way, who do you have to change the input with first? You. You have to change the input of your own thoughts if you want different outputs in terms of your feelings, your emotions, your behaviors. Okay, that's where you got to start. So, sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent. Let me get back to my notes here. There's three main mistakes people make with boundary setting. The first one is they don't even set the boundary. They just have an unmet expectation. So they're not firm about what they will tolerate. They're not firm about changing their inputs. They just piss and moan about what they dislike, okay? And they're not warm with their boundary setting either. I'll get to this in a second, because when you're setting boundaries with other people or with yourself, you need to be loving and warm at the same time. You can't just be firm, or it's not going to work. But being neither loving and neither firm will just put you in that mode where you feel reactive and your expectations are not met and you just feel anxious all the time. It's no good, okay? So the second mistake that people will make, by the way, when you do the thing I was just talking about, what ends up happening is you end up getting into learned helplessness, where you stop trying in the first place. So you stop trying to engage in the relationship at all. You put the wall up. You stop talking to your friends or whoever it is that you're having trouble with the boundaries on. Okay. Number two mistake that people make is they are loving and warm, but they are not firm. Okay. So when you are too soft with your requests and your needs, it ends up not being good. When you are unclear, when you basically say like, hey, I'd really prefer if X, Y, Z, do you think we could make that happen? That will work in some situations, okay? So it's not like you should never talk like that. Like there are some relationships that are really healthy and balanced, and there's good rapport and there's mutual respect, and you could go to somebody And you could be like, hey, hey, honey, I'd really prefer if we did it ABC. Do you think we could do that? And that'll end up working for a lot of people. Some people will be receptive to that. And a lot of you guys are just not even like being clear and upfront about what you want. You're just so timid. You're afraid it's not going to work. You're so burnt out on the idea because you feel like you've tried so many times to get through to somebody and they didn't react how you wanted them to react. So you just concluded in your mind it was not going to end up working, which is not necessarily true. You gotta, if you change the input, if you change the words and the tone and the energy that you throw at somebody, you're gonna get something different back, almost guaranteed. So anyway, being warm and not firm can work in some situations, but it does not work in a lot of situations. Okay, so for example, the client I was talking about who's got her son, an adult son, who's not cleaning up after himself and not doing his part in the house. She had tried being warm 100 times. She'd been doing it for 20 years, right? Like going to him and be like, "Oh, honey, do you need some help and some support? Do you need some guidance? What if you tried this? Well, what if you tried that? Well, you can do it, honey. I believe in you," right? Like playing in that realm is effective for people who naturally have their own direction. Okay, so think of it this way. Let's say, I'll talk to the parents out there. This will be a good way for you to think about it. If your child naturally has goals and direction, and they have their own ability to set their own standards. Okay, I was very much like this growing up. Like my parents really didn't have to like watch me that much. I was good in school. They didn't really have to ask about my grades. I made sure my homework was done. I had a job outside of school. I did well. I earned money. I even saved money in high school, right? Like I was a very responsible kid. Why? I kind of had a natural ability for setting my own boundaries. So as a parent, they didn't need to come in to establish boundaries for me to determine where I could go and where I couldn't go and what I could do and what I couldn't do. But if you're a parent, you have to be able to effectively establish boundaries. It is critical for children's successful development. Now, I'm not saying be a dictator. Okay, I'm not saying like go into the whole "you're gonna obey because I told you so" thing. That's just as bad, but for a different reason. But if you're like that parent that just wants to be your kid's friend first instead of being their parent, it's not gonna work. It just will not flat out work. Okay, they won't respect you. And more importantly, their development is just going to be shortcutted because they're not going to effectively learn how to parent themselves. So, what I coached my client on is a strategy that we call the Pick 3 strategy. Comes from one of my mentors, Chloe Madonis, who's a fantastically brilliant woman. She literally wrote the books on healing family systems and interpersonal therapy and coaching. Brilliant woman. Had the privilege of working with her for about a year. She's great. And she taught me this pick 3 strategy. Basically, as a parent, what you do is you clarify if it's 2 parents together, you get on the same page about what these 3 things are. If you're a single parent, then you can just pick them yourself. So with my client, she was a single parent. So anyway, basically, you get clear on what are the 3 non-negotiable boundaries. Like what are the 3 non-negotiable expectations that you have of your child that must be met? So the trick is it's got to be 3 or less, because if you have more than 3, then it ends up not working very well. The child ends up feeling like they can't win and they end up acting out. It's got to be 3 or less, okay? And so anyway, I think what we ended up deciding on was like your son's going to get a job, they're going to clean up after themselves, they're going to treat people with respect. It was something simple like that. But what I told my client they had to do is you can't go to your son and say, "Hey, honey, would you please pick up after yourself and get a job," and etc. What you have to do is you've got to go and you've got to establish what you will and will not tolerate with that child. So there's a specific way to do this. You go to the child and say, "Hey, honey, listen, I've put a lot of expectations on you, and I've also been unclear about what we're going to tolerate in this household, and that's unfortunately shortchanged you. It's not been helpful to you to not have any guidance, to not have any bumpers. And so, look, there's some changes that have to happen. You're going to do X, you're going to do Y, you're going to do Z, and if you just do those 3 things, I will be the happiest parent in the world. But these three things are non-negotiable, okay? And if you don't do these three things, there is going to be, consequences. There will be some punishment. But I want you to know I'm picking these three because these are the three expectations that matter to you. You've got to do X and Y and Z because that's what's necessary for you to be a happy, healthy kid. You're going to maintain a B plus average with your grades. You're going to stay in track and field. And you're gonna, do the dishes. That you're just gonna contribute that one tiny thing to the household. Those three things, that's it. We're gonna be me, and your dad are gonna be the happiest parents you could possibly ask for. But those three are non-negotiable anymore. Okay. And then what you got to do is you have to create the environment that will not tolerate the old pattern. Okay, that's the trick. So that's where the parents have to be in agreement. The parents got to be in lockstep about what the consequences are, and you got to back it up, and you got to positively reinforce the child when they are doing the things that you expect them to do. That's the pick three strategy. Works like a charm so long as the parents truly back it up and create a real boundary. The mistake a lot of parents do is they sit down their kids, they have the talk, and then they think their kids are going to be perfect and fall in line without any reinforcement, negative or positive. And it doesn't work like that. All human beings need positive and negative reinforcement from time to time, okay? So the mistake a lot of people make with setting boundaries with other people, okay, is they're warm, but they're not firm, which means it's not a boundary. It's just you're stating a preference, okay? And then you get burned, and what the story that we end up creating in our head is, well, I told them what I wanted. I asked them to do X, Y, Z. Why aren't they doing it? Right? And I know that makes sense. I know in an ideal world, we would just tell people like, hey, would you please pick up after yourself? And they would do it. And you wouldn't have to be firm and resolute in yourself. But that's just not the planet we live on. Okay? If you create an environment where their behavior is not preferred, but it is tolerated, then you will get the behavior that is not preferred. Because, again, remember, you get the life that you tolerate, not the life that you want. Okay? Pallavi, I see your comments. You say, I need help. Go ahead, let me know your situation, and I'll get to it in the Q&A. I'm almost done with the training section. Okay? Let me know what your situation is. I'll try to help. All right. The third mistake that people make with trying to set boundaries is the following. They attempt to be firm, but not loving and warm. Okay? This is where you can run into lots and lots of issues. So this is kind of like the classic, toxic masculine, although women do this too, but basically just being an asshole, being a jackass, right? Where basically it's the attitude of my way or the highway, okay? This is how it's going to be, and I'm deciding this is how it's going to be because I just don't like how it is, okay? This attitude is not good. There's a framework we teach our parents in our relationship program called the 4 parenting styles. And so what you want to be in a parenting mode, the help, what all the data tells us is that the best parenting mode to be in is what's called authoritative, not authoritarian. And I'm sharing this with you guys because I know a lot of you guys are not even parents, but this framework will help you learn how to set boundaries better with yourself. So listen closely. This applies to you even if you're not a parent. Okay? Authoritative is when you have clear boundaries and expectations and punishments and rewards for the child, but you don't go crazy. Okay, so basically the pick three I was just telling you about, right? You're not a parent that's permissive where everything goes, and if they do their homework or they don't do their homework, it's okay, and if they clean up or they don't clean up, it's okay, and if they're out all night, it's okay. That's called permissive parenting. That creates bad situations. And authoritarian, okay, think dictator, parenting style, is when you're totally on the other side of the spectrum where you're like, no, I told you, you're not wearing that shirt to school because I don't like it, right? Where you just have arbitrary rules and boundaries that don't make any sense. They don't improve the child's life. The child feels like they're arbitrary. And because it's arbitrary, the child will end up acting out. It doesn't work, okay? So what you've got to do is you've got to be in the middle. Okay, you've got to be authoritative. Authoritative means you have clear, strong boundaries. Let's put it this way. You have as few boundaries as possible, but no fewer. Okay, so in other words, you're not trying to just create a bunch of boundaries and create a bunch of rules, but you do have the rules that matter. Okay, authoritative parents also make sure that they include their child in the process of developing what those rules and expectations are going to be. They don't just arbitrarily hand them down. Okay, so authoritative is what tends to lead to the healthiest outcomes for kids. The reason I'm sharing this with you, though, even if you're not a parent, is because you need to be authoritative with yourself. Okay, you need to parent yourself, especially if you didn't have effective parents growing up. You have to learn how to parent yourself. And a lot of you guys are either in the permissive camp or the authoritarian camp with yourself. So you either go like, oh, you know what? I don't know. I'm just not feeling like it today. I don't think I'm going to work out. It's just, I don't know. It's okay. Whatever. You're permissive even around the things that you know you want to be doing. You let yourself off the hook for everything. And what that ends up doing is it ruins your freaking life because you got no structure and no discipline whatsoever. But then to flip on the other side, the other unhealthy thing to do is to be authoritarian with yourself. Where you're like, I'm a piece of crap. Why am I not doing this? You just like belittle yourself. Or you go like totally full tilt of like, all right, that's it. Tomorrow I'm waking up at 6 in the morning. I'm going to run for 4 hours. I'm never going to have a piece of candy ever again. And I've done this many times where you try to be super authoritarian and you crumble under your own expectations. It doesn't work. What you got to do is you got to be in the middle. You got to be authoritative. You got to have clear, intolerable, non-negotiable expectations. Standards is the real word I should use. Standards, okay? Things that you will not tolerate going below, that you are very clear about communicating with yourself and that you're very clear on in your relationships. And you only have those boundaries for the things that truly, really, absolutely matter. That's the key. That's the thing that really works. So, how do you create a real effective boundary with yourself or other people? It's only 2 ingredients, guys. Only 2 ingredients. And I want you to write these down in the chat, put them in your notes, lock them into your brain. You need 2 things. Number 1 thing you need to establish an effective boundary with yourself or others is you need to come from a loving state. Okay, and I'm going to clarify what this means in a minute. Loving state. The second thing that you need is you must be firm. Let me define what firm means. Firm means you need to be clear on what you will and will not tolerate. That's what firm means. Firm does not mean you're yelling at the top of your lungs. That's not what firm is. Firm is not you're swearing and you're cussing and you're yelling at somebody else. That's not what firm is. Okay. Firm is you clarifying, I will tolerate X, I will not tolerate Y. Okay. That's what firm is. So let me give you, and I'll workshop some examples for you guys in a second. Okay. But let me explain what these qualities mean. So first, you need to come from a loving state. Well, what does that mean? So with my clients, for example, okay, I establish clear boundaries with my clients as soon as they become a client. Like from the very first call I have with them, I make it very clear, here's how we're doing things. But the trick is, I'm not just like telling them, hey, you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do this because I said so. What I'm telling them is the truth. What I'm telling them is, hey, look, you joined this program because you deserve a life without anxiety. And you came to this program because you've tried everything under the sun to try to get your anxiety handled, but you've never had an environment that taught you what you needed to know and reinforced you for holding yourself to higher standards of making sure that you actually got the life that you wanted. And what I tell them is, look, this is going to be a program where you finally succeed because we will not tolerate failure. And we know that there are very clear things that you need to implement in order to succeed, but it's a very simple list. So I tell them right up front, I will work with you one-on-one as long as it takes until you get your anxiety handled. However, I will only work with you one-on-one as long as it takes, so long as you do all your homework and you follow all your instructions. That's it. And so I make it very clear to them, I will not tolerate continuing to work with you if you're clear on your instructions, we get rid of the points of confusion, and then you just get lazy. I'm not going to tolerate that. We cannot tolerate that because laziness will lead to perpetual anxiety. So I make it very clear to them, these are the walls, right? You can do this, but you cannot do this other thing. But I make it very clear to them. I'm always coming from a state of mind of I have your best interests in mind. That is why these boundaries exist. These boundaries don't exist to serve my ego or serve my business or any of that bullshit. The boundaries exist because you deserve a life that's free of anxiety. And to have a life free of anxiety, we must have boundaries of what we do and what we don't do. And so when I communicate it like that to them, they feel it. They're like, damn, this is what I need. Like, I need someone who's going to hold my feet to the fire. I need someone who's going to truly have my own best interests at heart, even when I don't have my own best interests at heart. Okay. Now think about coming at this from a parenting perspective. Okay. If you go and talk to your child and you say, hey, you're not doing well enough on your homework, you need to do better. Well, that's not very effective, right? Because they're going to go, what the hell? Like, that's not nice. Why? Just so you can serve your ego of being a parent with an all-star student? Like, who cares? But if you go to the child and you say, honey, you are way capable of way better than this. Like, you are so smart. You have a great brain. I know you're going to do great things. And I'm not going to sit around and watch you waste your potential. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to stand for it. Okay, I love you too much. Okay, write this down. I love you too much to tolerate X, Y, Z. That's a really powerful phrase you can use. I love you too much to tolerate this. Okay, if someone came to you like that, wouldn't you love to have somebody in your life that talked to you that way, that was like, hey, I'm calling you out on your bullshit. I'm not going to tolerate you doing X and Y and Z because I love you too much. I'm not going to sit around. And by the way, guys, let me draw a very clear line between something. Okay, this is the difference between pleasing somebody and serving somebody. When you please somebody, you're actually making it about you, not about them. Because when you please somebody, you're only saying and doing what you think you need to say and do in order for them to continue to give you approval. And so if they give you approval, you then feel good enough. So really, you're giving in order to get. You're only saying what you think they want to hear, which is bullshit. That is selfish, okay? And by the way, I'm not judging you. Sorry, that sounded a little rude. I've done that plenty of times. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at this, okay? So I'll admit, I'm human. But I will tell you, I have definitely shifted the needle on this hugely with myself and with my clients and with other people. What I used to do with my clients is I was so deathly afraid of pissing them off or offending them that I wouldn't tell them the truth. I wouldn't tell them the full, absolute truth. I wouldn't call them out on their shit when they needed to be called out on it. And what I realized is that was basically like as if they had a giant booger hanging out in their nose, and I didn't want to make them feel weird by pointing it out to them, and I didn't want them to think that I was a jerk for pointing it out. But the thing is, if I don't point out that big giant booger they have hanging out of their nose, are they really going to be better off? They're going to hate me 5 years from now if I let them keep that booger hanging in their nose for 5 years. It'd be so much better for me to go, hey, you got a big giant booger in your nose. Let's take care of that, right? They'll immediately feel a little awkward, a little weird, but they'll be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you told me. And that's what I do. Now with my clients, my priority is to serve them. And that means if my real priority is to serve somebody, I have to be willing to tell them what displeases them from time to time. I don't need to seek to displease them, right? I'm not trying to purposefully piss people off. But I have to be willing to have those tough conversations or ask the tough questions. I have to be willing to go there because no one else in their life has ever gone there with them before. Do you follow me? That's what's required. It'd be like just like if you had a great sports coach growing up. If they just allowed you to tolerate mediocrity, are they really serving you? No. They're screwing you over. It's not helpful. All right, so you got to come from a loving state. And loving, what I really believe love really is you're putting the other person above yourself. You're putting the other person's needs and desires above yourself, but not in a sacrificial way, in a way where by lighting them up and filling them up and doing what really serves them, it elevates you at the same time. That's the key, okay? You're never really doing something out of an act of love if it's diminishing you. That's people pleasing, okay? So there is a difference. So you got to come from a loving state. You got to come from a state of I'm really doing what is in your best interest. The second thing, though, is you must be firm. So you can't just go to somebody and be like, honey, You have so much more potential than this. Don't you want to try harder? That's not going to work. Okay? But you can't go to them and be like, "Hey, what the hell are you doing slacking off like this? You're better than that." Right? That's not going to work either. You need to come from the mode of, "Look, I know what you're capable of. I know who you really are. I see who you really are deep down. And I am not going to tolerate you playing small like this anymore. I'm just not. I'm not going to stand for it. I'm not going to participate in it. I'm not going to stand for it. I won't." Okay, that's what happens. Those are the types of conversations that break people's addictions. Those are the types of conversations that make people go, "Oh shit, I can't keep doing what I've been doing anymore." That's where transformation occurs. That's where change occurs. That is where your power exists. If you can learn to communicate the way that I'm training you to communicate with yourself and other people, you are going to have so much power in your life, you have no clue what to do with it. Because you'll realize you've just been giving your power away to other people and other things your whole freaking life. And really, it was just on you to set new boundaries. Okay? So, how to do it with somebody else? Determine what their highest needs are, not what their presenting pattern is. 2, determine what your truest needs are, not what your survival brain is telling you. Ground yourself in a state of service. Align with their model of the world. So, what would be even better is if I went to my daughter or something and said, "Hey, honey, I don't know what's going on. I mean, you might be a little frustrated. You might feel a little challenged. Maybe school just doesn't seem very cool to you. It's all good, but you're capable of so much more than this," right? So if I align with her current model of the world and appreciate her feelings and then lead her to a higher outcome, that's going to be way better than if I'm just like, "Hey, why are you slacking off at school?" That's not going to work. Okay, next, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or excuse me, yes, 5. Clarify what you are and are not willing to tolerate with them. Number 6, back up your words with convicted actions until a new pattern is established. And then number 7, use practical language tools of "I will not tolerate" and "I refuse to." Okay. So remember, the bottom line I want you guys to remember is you get the life that you tolerate, not the life that you want. And let me bring it all full circle, bringing it right back to mental health. You get the mental health that you tolerate, not the mental health that you want. What I mean by that is a lot of you guys have negative thinking, or you have habits of talking to yourself a particular way, or you do a thing each and every day that you know you really shouldn't do. You know it makes your mental health worse. You know you would be so much better off if you didn't do it, but you tolerate it. Like, for example, not waking up at the same time every day, or oversleeping, or not exercising anymore, or telling yourself you're a loser, or whatever it is, okay? What you need to do, what you've got to do, well, okay, I'm not telling you got to do anything, but in my experience, the only way to really live a life without anxiety, to really get rid of anxiety, depression, any other things that are going on, is you have to draw a line in the sand with those micro patterns, is what we call those. So, for example, you could start small by saying, "You know what? I've been telling myself for 5 years that I'm lazy. And every time I tell myself that I'm lazy, I feel like crap, and then I end up being lazy. I'm not going to tolerate calling myself lazy anymore. That is not loving, and that is not being firm." So notice that if I establish a boundary with myself and say, "I refuse to call myself lazy anymore. I love myself too much to call myself lazy," that is establishing a real boundary. Okay? And remember, repetition of language creates belief. So you might feel like you're faking it till you make it at the start, okay? But you will create a new belief system over time. The words that you say habitually become the life that you live. So you got to pay very close attention to the words that you use. Every mental health problem, in essence, is really a self-communication problem. All anxiety, all pain, all trauma, it really comes down to the patterns of how we communicate with ourselves, okay? So let me quickly check, see if there were any questions. We got some good comments. Ethan says, "Come from a living state, you must be firm with what you tolerate." Thank you guys so much for iterating the key points in the questions. Really appreciate it. Great feedback today. So really, really love it. Final thing, got a gift for you guys. We have opened up enrollment for October. The way that our enrollment process works is the following. So we do a totally free 25-minute free coaching session with me in with you. It is not a sales call. It is not, there's no pitch, there's no catch, there's no obligation, there's none of that stuff. It's just me helping you for half an hour, one-on-one directly. So if you find a lot of value in these like one-to-many trainings, imagine how much I could help you in 25 minutes, right? Giving you some recommendations specific to you. So the way that we do this is we do a free coaching session first, and I just want to help you. The reason I do this is I just want to help. And the fastest way I think I can convince you that I could help you as a client is, rather than me trying to sell you on being a client, why don't I just actually help you? And then you'll go, holy shit, this actually helped. And then you'll probably want to be a client, right? Which is great. If that ends up working out, great. If it ends up not working out, that's fine. But that way, if I start with a free coaching session with you, then I can still rest easy at night. Like sometimes I do my coaching session with you and I'm like, hey, what I gave you on this coaching session will help you. But if you want to get this thing like fully handled, let's work together. Let's have a follow-up conversation. Then that's cool if it ends up working out that way. But if I do my free coaching session with you and I find out for some reason we're not a good fit to work together, that's fine too. And I still helped you out. And every person in our community can get one free coaching session. So if you would like a totally free coaching session, just put the word session in the comments. All right, I'll go ahead and message you, I'll DM you, and we'll go ahead and set that up. Or if you're listening to our podcast afterwards, just go ahead and go to mentalhealthcoaching.com, book that free session. We only have a few spots left for this upcoming week. Once they're gone, they're gone, and they're in the highest demand they've ever been. So go ahead and ask for one if you haven't gotten one before, and we'll go ahead and set one up for you guys, okay? But thanks so much for participating. I'll see you guys for another awesome live stream training next Thursday at 6. See you then. Bye.